Hello everyone and welcome to Lesson 8 of our How to Teach Go series. In this lesson we're going to talk about extend, approach, and enclose, and basically the introduction to 19 by 19. Now, basically the difference between 19 by 19 and a smaller board is pretty much the open sides. Everything else is practically going to be the same. Though we will be introducing Joseki and stuff like that, that will be in the future for them to learn. For beginners, we just want to explain that the 9 by 9 and 13 by 13 tactics we used can now be applied on the 19 by 19, but on a broader scale, and sometimes it will be in local fights. However, to play a good opening in the 19 by 19, we basically will utilize the same tactics: corner, side, biggest area. For like we did in the corner, or like we did on the smaller boards, we said open corners first, then open sides, and then expand your position. Well, in this case, you could say biggest area after that, because many players like to say center, but that can cause some confusion. So I have changed my wording to biggest area. The center is very small, and many players make this mistake. They try to make territory in the center. Center in Gote is very small. Building up a position is not small depending on the position, but building up the center is. So it's important to distinct the biggest area or biggest position versus the open center, because the center in itself is not big. It's a big position expanding that is big. All right, anyway, that's something you can introduce if you want, but basically that's the reason I changed my wording. So I say open corners, open sides, biggest areas, and then you will use the same logic on this. However, with this, you will introduce some new concepts, which is play the biggest side when it's time for sides. The reason I say the biggest sides or the widest side is because more times than not, the widest side is going to be the biggest move or the right direction. Now let's talk a little bit about how to teach that. So first off, you would say open corners, open sides. So you can say this, and then a 3-4, 4-4, and now you're going to work on sides. And in this, you would teach a beginner, so what's the widest side? And you could just count the spaces between. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's 11, the bottom's 11, and the left side's 11. However, the right side is going to be 12. And so that means, in the beginner's eyes, the right side will be the biggest area. And then you can teach 3 different things, which is extend, approach, or enclose. These are the 3 options you usually have to play on an open side, and these will be right more times than wrong. Let's explain a little bit about that. The reason I say the open sides are going to be right more times than wrong is because most of the time the empty side is the biggest move. It may not be the most urgent move, which, if you read the Colossi approach, fix your weaknesses first, attack your opponent's weaknesses second, and then get to the biggest move. The biggest move is usually open corners, open sides, biggest area. And for the opening, it's open corners, open sides. So that means the open sides are most likely going to be the biggest area. It's right 80 or 90% of the time you will get to the most open side. There are exceptions, and there are different patterns you can use to make one side bigger than another. However, for a beginner, this is not important. Just getting them to play and giving them something to think about, or giving them an option to consider, is what's more important than being 100% correct. In Go, there is no 100% correct. So that means while saying the biggest or most open side is always the biggest is not the right wording, but saying more times than not the most open side is the biggest move to play is an okay wording, because it's a lot easier for a beginner just to count the open sides. Now, when you have the open sides, let's throw in some start points. When you have the open sides, you can say, all right, so pick the side that you want to play. You can pick your side, your opponent's side, or the neutral sides. And once you've decided on a side, you need to think, okay, now I've picked a side, where do I play on that side? And for this, you can do an extend, an approach, or an enclosure. So an extension is a 5-space extension. Extensions on the 19 by 19, or extensions from a position or a corner, are 5-space extensions. This is ideal because of the distance from the position. Now, why is this distance important? It actually has to do with white invading. Let's say white invades, and I just simply block my corner, like so. White wants to extend 2 spaces to make a base. However, when white extends 2, you see that there's a touching move. We don't like these touching moves. It's bad for white because black was here first. Therefore, when black plays as Hane, you can see it's 2 liberties to 3 liberties and 3 liberties, so white's at a slight disadvantage. because touching like so will help your opponent surround you. Therefore, a touching move is not recommended. So when you extend for a base, you want to extend as far as you can without touching. Therefore, white's furthest extension is here, a one-space extension, which is not ideal for a base. If we went any further, let's say 6 spaces, then this invasion or this approach, when blocked, white can now extend 2 spaces, ideally, and make a base in here. Now, granted, this is, again, not impossible to play. A 6-space extension is common, especially from a Shamari. It is possible. Like, for example, I can give you an example right now if it ever comes up. If you have a Shamari facing a Shamari, or even a star point facing a Shamari, perhaps a 6-space extension will be ideal to reduce the Shamari's influence. For example, if I just played a 5-space extension, now the extension for the Shamari will be a 3-space extension and have around an estimated of 6 points. But if I go here, now it's only a 2-space extension, which is only 4 points. So it's slightly more effective and more valuable for black. However, this is with a purpose. In other words, we're defining the basics of a 5-space extension because we have a purpose or a meaning or an exception. But more cases than not, a 5-space extension will be fine in most cases. Now, you can show the beginner this or you don't have to. I wouldn't because it's just too complicated right now. However, if it comes up, it's important to know. Now let's talk about back to the position. Let me just clear these 2 stones off. Back to the position that we were at. I have to go back here. When we are extending a position, we simply jump over 5. And I would show this example with the 2-space extension, so that way they understand why it's 5. 5 is as far as you can go while still pinceling an approach move inside. So an inside approach move ideally should already be pincered if you have an extension. And this is an ideal pincer because this way you don't have to pincer again here because you've already pincered it. Therefore, you can block your corner, or in other cases, you can kick. But I wouldn't worry about this because this one, for a beginner, may be slightly deceiving. It looks like a touching move, but it's not quite the same. It's a little bit different than a touching move. Normally, don't touch weak stones or single stones. In this case, it's slightly different, but we don't want to get into that right now. That's why I've been blocking this one instead of the kick. However, I would say the kick is probably more common against this position, especially if it's a Sanrense. They come in. A kick is definitely the right move. However, you can show this one, but I would put it on this side. Let's talk about a little bit why. So the kick, as I just mentioned, is touching a single stone, and that might confuse the beginner. We don't want to worry about that right now. First, we want to say when we block, white can't extend. Therefore, we want to jump a 5-space extension. Later, when we introduce Sanrense, then we can introduce the kick. And we can say because of this, we can kick. And the reason it's okay to touch a single stone is because white is over-concentrated. You can introduce that later. But for now, I would set it up on this side and not kick. I would play this one. That's easier to understand for our concept. It's a better example to explain our concept than the kick. However, if you were to do that same thing on this side, then they'll start a bad habit. This is the Sanrense. This is the move you don't want to play. You want to see this one. And we want to show our beginner as many good shapes as we can. Therefore, in order to prevent them from playing this way in the Sanrense, we just wouldn't show it in the Sanrense. We would show it on an open side, like so. Anyway, that's my reasoning for that. You may disagree, you may agree, it's fine, but this is my reason for showing it on this side. Alright, so that's my explanation for the 5-space extension and my reasoning for playing it on this side and using this example. Now, that's an extension. So 5-space extension is the way to extend a position or a corner. Now let's talk about an approach. An approach will open a whole new bag of worms, which is Joseki's. An approach, though, when you first explain it, I wouldn't worry about Joseki. You can mention the word and explain to them that there are common patterns that you can look up on the internet, but kind of brush over it. Don't get into Joseki just yet. It's a little confusing to introduce Joseki until they get used to approach moves. And I would let them approach and play around with it first and let them understand how approach moves work. But when I would explain the approach move, I would say it's one space away from your opponent's stone. And what I mean by this is, rather than playing a touch move, where we're at a disadvantage, I don't want to play this move, because this move, the very next move will be touching, and will be at a disadvantage of lack of liberties. Therefore, since I don't want his next move to touch me, I would want to be one space away. One space away is ideal to approach your opponent's stone. Now, you can approach on the third line or the fourth line. Don't worry about discouraging this one just yet. This one isn't very common with a start point, but I would not tell a beginner that this is not a good move, at least not yet, because a high move and a low approach on the third line or a high approach on the fourth line are both common against the 3-4 point. So in the beginner's mind, the difference between a 3-4 and a 4-4 shouldn't be that much difference for an approach move. While there is, we don't need to teach that yet. It's just too complicated. Of course, if it was a 4-4, I would show this example. If you want to set up a 3-4, for example, like this, then you can do so. However, this might also teach them to play this white move against the star point. In other words, how about this one? You can play this 3-4 point if you would like. And then you can say, if you want to approach your opponent's corner, you can approach high or you can approach low. And this will be an approach move where you simply play a move where you are one space away from your opponent's cornerstone, and you can be on the third line or the fourth line, because it's still the opening, third line and fourth line. Then I would play out the most basic joseki. So in this case, I would simply say, I play here, white approaches, so white extends his position. I slide under, even though this is a second line, this is a territory stealing move, or as territory and base stealing move, so white must block for his eyes, and then I play my 2-space extension. Another way to introduce this is I would simply play here, white extends, and I extend. White might also extend here, but they'll say one stone wants to jump over 2. Let this happen. This is okay. This is not a bad move. It's actually very old-fashioned, but it was a move back a long time ago. It's not old-fashioned, so this move might be okay for a beginner to try. I wouldn't discourage it yet, but in the future you will have to teach the pros and cons of this move versus this move. However, if they choose to play an extension here, you can play this one. And then I would say, okay, and now that I've approached you and you defended, I'm by myself, so I'm going to defend. So I'm going to go right here and make my 2-space extension. So this would be a good example. And then you'll say, okay, yes, you made a 2-space extension, but later, white can block. So therefore, I want to play a good exchange move first. So for example, I'm going to slide under. Now, if you ignore me, let's say I ignore you, I'm going to play here, and you can see white is losing his eyes, or his base, or his territory. So white must block this way. And they may ask, why not here? And you'll say, okay, I'll show you a quick variation. You don't have to remember it, just know the reason. And then you simply play this way. And you say, white will lose the corner if he does this, because this stone can get cut off. It has bad liberties. So because it has bad liberties, white can't play this way. Therefore, white plays this one. And then after you make this slide exchange, you simply jump back. If they ask why you're playing on the second line instead of the third line, simply say it's because a second line is better than a touching move when taking your opponent's points. The second line is good for sliding under and stealing points for free, or making a reduction or a point stealing move, or some type of point stealing strategy or base stealing strategy. The second line is useful for that. So I'm simply making a good exchange before getting back and playing the correct move, which is a 2-space extension. In this case, you could say that this is, if you want to introduce josekis, this is a common joseki. However, this example you can use if you want. For now, I would say teach the approach and simply say white responds, and then black can simply play, or black can jump back, for example, here. And I would ask them, are you going, the reason for this one is because of a 5-space extension, and you approached, and now you have a 5-space extension, and I would ask them, does this position look good to you? And usually they'll probably say, yeah, black got a whole side, looks great. And that will be a good example. So there's 2 ways to teach this. One is to introduce this variation first, or the other is to simply jump back like this. Now, both are good teaching styles, and you can have varying response depending on the student. Some students will understand one more than the other. For example, if you feel that they are understanding Go very well, then you might show the D18 example or the slide example, like so. But if you were just trying to teach a concept and you just want them to remember the concept and nothing else right now, then you can simply say white responds and then black jumps back, like so. And this is a 5-space extension with an approach. And then you might ask, what about here? Is this also good? They'll probably say, yeah, I think so. but this looks a little bit better because it has more points. Now we're going to get into third line, fourth line extensions. So yes, we already talked about extensions, and we talked about an approach. But let's go back to extensions a little bit, or you can teach us at the same time as extensions. It's up to you. But if you have an extension and you say third line or fourth line, what's the difference? And the difference is the third line is for security, and the fourth line is for development or for building. You want to build on your side and secure on your opponent's side. What this means is, because there's a white stone, if I simply play fourth line, then my opponent might try to come under me, and I'll have to block on the third line. And I don't like this 1-1 exchange. Rather, I would rather just be on the third line. So because white is here, I'm going to go on the third line and secure my position. Fourth line wants to come down to the third line wants to go up to the fourth line. So when I approached and then jumped back, well, now white's not going to get to play here because now I have support. Because I have support here, I can now go fourth line. To further use this example, you could ask your student, if you're on the right side, would you play here for security or here for development? Some may get it, some may not. But the answer is here because because of these two corners. Because these two corners are supporting the middle stone, are in the corners and supporting the middle stone, you want to develop this area. White is not on this side, so you do not need security on this side. You need to develop. So therefore, a fourth line is better. But if you're on the side with your opponent's stone, then you want to play secure for a third line, or third line for security. But you can also approach and play this combination to make a big position. Are multiple ways to use it. But normally, it's extension, approach, or enclose. So now we get to talk about corner enclosures. A corner enclosure is a one-space extension instead of a two that surrounds a corner. So a fourth line actually comes down to a third line and secures the corner. So in this case, rather than a two-space extension, I chose a one-space extension for security and strength. Now also, fourth line comes down to the third line and you secure it. You can also go this way, which is also fine for a beginner. However, I would point them to this direction because this is the one where there's a white stone. You want to develop on your side and secure on the opponent's side. So therefore, you'd want to extend down for security on the side with the opponent's stone. Another example to use is the shimari. So for example, let's say I'm here. And you say you want to play on the bottom side. We have three options. 1, an extension. 2, an approach. Or 3, corner enclosure, which is normally one space. You can do a two-space corner enclosure. It just has more aji, or weakness, and you can teach aji if you want. Aji means weakness. It's basically taste in Japanese, but it basically means you can taste weakness, or you can feel weakness, you can smell the aji, something like that. But basically, there's weakness. This one has less weakness, so one space is very secure. Again, fourth line comes down to the third line, and this is a very strong position. It's a very strong corner. And you can teach this. Fourth line comes out of third line, so one space to enclose. So this is a corner enclosure for black. This is an extension for black, and this is an approach. So on the open sides, the most open sides, you have normally 3 options: extend, approach, or enclose. All are equally good in most cases. Therefore, you can just choose the ones that are your favorite, depending on your style. And I want you to teach a beginner this and say that choose your favorite, and they're all good in most cases, because I don't want them to get stuck in one way. You don't want to say an approach is better than a closure, or an extension is better than an approach, or anything like that. You want them to experiment and learn all of them and figure out which ones they like and which ones they think are the best. Because in the end of the day, the opening is very flexible, and many players will find different patterns throughout the years, as you saw from the shimari of the olden times versus a mini Chinese now, and now there's even the micro Chinese here. So there's many methods and many openings. So let them be free in the opening. Just give them guidelines. And also, you can even say that these are the 3 most common things to think about. But there are other options that you can try, but these are the most common, and this will give you something to think about. The most open. After teaching this will give the beginner some ideas on how to play in the opening on a 19x19. So yes, they have attack and defense, a little bit of attack and defense, and contact fights, which they learned from the smaller boards. They have some in-game things that they learned from the 9x9, and now they're in the opening. So this entire series, you taught the rules and you're teaching how to play, but you're actually teaching them backwards in the sense that on 9x9 you learn a lot of in-game and contact stuff. On 13x13 you learn some middle game stuff and attack and defense stuff and evasions. And on the 19x19 you learn the opening patterns. So you're actually learning it in reverse: end game, middle game, opening. But at the end of the day, you need to apply all three to improve and play a good game. So I think this teaching style is very unique, but I think also it could be very good for many beginners to have a good, strong, solid foundation for when they improve in the future. And it also let them play many games, get experience very quickly before just throwing them on a 19x19 board and expecting them to be able to play the entire game at once. Instead, this method breaks it into steps and smaller boards and smaller chunks to let them learn each step on their own, one at a time, and then they can apply it all at the end. So on the 19x19, you are now learning the opening patterns, which is open corners and then open sides, and then the open sides are basically extend, approach, or enclosures on the most open side, and this should solve more than 80 or 90% of the situations that a beginner will encounter. Alright, so hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully this will help you teach beginners when they're getting introduced to a 19x19. And there's one more video in this series, and then I'll go ahead and start the next series. But hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Hopefully you find it helpful and can teach many beginners how to play Go. As always, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys in the next video.